Russia, the city of Cheboksary, November 27, 2009, around 5 in the evening. 24-year-old Alyona Gorbunova, the daughter of well-known Cheboksary businessman Viktor Gorbunov, is returning in her car from the funeral of a close friend. The young man died very young, in the prime of his life. Alyona is completely upset and exhausted. The only thought in her mind is to get home as soon as possible, talk to her father on the phone, and go to bed. On the way, Alyona remembers that there is almost no food in the fridge. She'll have to stop by the supermarket. The girl rushes into the nearest smack store, throws some groceries into the cart, and mechanically pays with her card. Alyona is so lost in her thoughts that she hardly pays attention to what's happening around her. She also doesn't notice the person who first followed her into the store and then headed toward her car, keeping a little behind. Alyona gets into the car. The first thing she does is reach for her seatbelt, a habit so ingrained it's automatic. When she straightens up after fastening her seatbelt, a cold knife blade presses against her neck. Alyona Gorbunova will not leave this car alive. A few hours later, her father will be the one to pull the girl's bloodied body out of the car. You are on the Strashnota channel, and today we have a tough case involving a participant from the Battle of Psychics. Alyona Gorbunova was born in 1985 in Cheboksary, into the family of Viktor Gorbunov, who would later become a well-known entrepreneur, but at that time was just an ordinary worker at a railway company. The girl was an only child, and from early childhood she was surrounded by her parents' care and love. Little Alyona was never denied anything. Gorbunov, who grew up in a poor village family, spoiled his daughter and fulfilled her every whim. He called her Alyonushka and joked that all they needed for complete happiness was a son. Of course, Ivanushka. The girl was his little princess. Since her childhood, Alyona and her father were very close. The girl shared all her worries and joys with him. When Viktor came home from work, Alyona would drop everything and run to meet him. Alyona Gorbunova's childhood took place in the first decade after the collapse of the USSR, privatization, unemployment, and although the country was shaken by changes, the Gorbunov family was lucky. The company where Viktor worked did not close down. Moreover, in 1993, Viktor Gorbunov became the general director of United Railway Enterprise LLC, which he would lead until 2021. On the one hand, this meant that the family no longer had to worry about money. On the other hand, Gorbunov had to stay late at work more and more often. Alyona missed her father, waited for him, and refused to go to bed until her dad came home from work. When the girl turned 12, the Gorbunov family went through a tragedy. Alyona's mother passed away. The girl had a hard time coping with the loss, but her father was always there for her. The death of her mother brought Alyona and Viktor even closer together. Her father didn't involve his daughter in business matters, but she could still come to him with any question or ask him to solve any problem. Partners and colleagues knew that Gorbunov adored his daughter and was ready to do anything to make her life better. It was only a matter of time before Alyona herself would join the business. Alyona Gorbunova had a striking appearance, and there were always a lot of guys around her. But the girl was picky. She often told her friends, "For me, the ideal man is my father." Alyona wanted to meet a man who would be her support, who would be ready to listen to her and support her in everything. In the mid-2000s, the United Railway Company was experiencing a boom. The crisis had passed, and the enterprise was developing and expanding. It was only natural that the family of the general director lacked nothing. Alyona was interested in her father's business and wanted to work side by side with him. In 2008, the 23-year-old woman took the position of director of a non-profit organization specializing in railway transportation and the supply of inert building materials. Who appointed her as director? Of course it was her father, who dismissed his good acquaintance, who at the time held a good position, when it came to the issue of meritocracy. Alyona was not the reason for the dismissal. The acquaintance left the director's position due to a conflict, but regardless, Gorbunov made an enemy for himself. Later, he will have to remember this more than once. According to her father, Alyona handled her new responsibilities excellently, and he never once regretted his decision. Gorbunov continued to spoil his daughter, bought her an apartment in the city center, and then a black Mazda car, which she had dreamed of for a long time. Alyona also chose a nice license plate for herself, T555 EK35s that bring good luck. She loved the car, but the 35s didn't bring Alyona any luck. On the evening of November 27th, 2009, Alyona Gorbunova was at the funeral of a good friend of hers. Gorbunov knew about the tragedy and expected his daughter to return from the funeral upset. Alyona often called her father in the evenings, and that evening he was also waiting for her call and was ready to support his daughter with a kind word. But time passed and Alyona still didn't call. Victor dialed her number, but there was no answer. After some time he tried again, but the subscriber was still temporarily unavailable. This happened a couple more times, and each time a female voice on the phone informed Gorbunov that his daughter's phone was turned off. It was already late in the evening and it was getting close to midnight. A feeling of anxiety arose in Gorbunov's soul. Alyona would never have turned off her phone without warning. If his daughter was busy and couldn't talk, she would always text her father. By midnight, Gorbunov had completely lost his peace of mind. He paced back and forth around the house, periodically dialing his daughter's number. However, the phone was still turned off. Gorbunov called her friends, but she wasn't with them. A father's heart knew something had happened to his daughter. He had no idea where to look for Alyona, but he knew where to start the search. The first thing Gorbunov did was go to the local traffic police station. He reasoned like this: to find Alyona, he needed to find the car. From here on, the events are described in his own words. As soon as he entered the room, Gorbunov almost immediately overheard a conversation between two inspection officers. The men were discussing a car found at the intersection of Gagarin and Sivilskaya streets near the Olympic Stadium. Gorbunov listened in. They were talking about a black Mazda with the license plate number 555. It was his daughter's car. Gorbunov's heart sank. The man's first thought was, Alyona was in an accident. She needs to be saved. Go to the hospital. Talk to the doctors. He practically burst into the office at a run, demanding to know which hospital his daughter had been taken to and how badly she was hurt. But the expressions on the employees' faces made him stop almost instantly. And when Gorbunov heard what had really happened, he clutched at his heart. His daughter, 24-year-old Alyona Gorbunova, was found dead in her car. She was lying on the back seat in a pool of blood. Her glazed eyes stared into emptiness. There were 7 in some sources, 8 stab wounds on Alyona's body. Her neck was simply riddled with knife wounds. The girl died from massive blood loss caused by damage to major blood vessels. Gorbunov went to the crime scene with the detectives. The car's interior was splattered with blood from top to bottom. It soaked into the upholstery and pooled in puddles on the floor. The first thing Gorbunov saw was Alyona's legs in heeled boots. The legs didn't move and there wasn't a sound coming from the car. The man had to gather all his strength to take another step and look inside. Yes, he said hoarsely, looking into the face of his deceased daughter and feeling that he couldn't look away. It's her. Later he recalled, I took her out of the car myself. I have a photo from when we brought her home from the maternity hospital. And just like that, with her eyes open, I took her out of the car and put her on the stretcher to take her to the morgue. The terrible crime instantly shocked Cheboksary. Gorbunov was well known in the city, if not by face, then by name. The local newspapers wrote about what happened, and the news made headlines on the local TV channel. While the investigation was ongoing, Alyona's friends and acquaintances, as well as just caring people, began bringing flowers to the fence near the Olympic Stadium. Soon this place turned into a kind of memorial. Cheboksary forums were filled with discussions, and everyone had their own theory as to why. The investigation was considering 3 main motives. One of the first main theories was revenge. Gorbunov was known to be a rather arrogant person. He himself admitted this, although he claimed that in fact he actually disliked arrogance, bureaucracy and conceit. He had been at the helm of the Cheboksary railway management for more than 15 years and had no intention of leaving his post. Moreover, he appointed his 24-year-old daughter not just as a manager, but as the director of the organization. Some people might not have liked that. Alyona could have become the victim of a contract killing, a bloody warning to her father, or even a punishment. The thought drove Gorbunov crazy, but he couldn't deny the possibility of such a motive. The second theory was that her death was caused by jealousy. Alyona had many admirers. Beautiful, spoiled by attention and money, she knew her own worth. Someone who had been rejected out of some incredible jealousy, and maybe because he was drunk, he could have attacked the girl after an argument. The third theory was an attack for financial gain. A lone girl in an expensive car at night could have attracted the attention of robbers. Even if someone didn't know Alyona by sight, by the make of the car and the license plate, it would have been easy to guess the owner's level of wealth. Besides, someone could have noticed the diamond rings on Alyona's fingers. A girl who looked fragile was an easy victim for a man with a knife, and the cramped space of the car wouldn't have allowed her to put up any significant resistance. But Gorbunov himself immediately dismissed the theory of murder for financial gain. Alyona had a bank card with her that had a substantial amount of money. There were 300,000 rubles on it. What stopped the robber from forcing her to withdraw money from the card and give it to him? Besides, Alyona's rings with precious stones were not taken off her fingers. Only her phone, car keys, and, as it would later turn out, 500 rubles that she had in her wallet were missing. The criminal left almost empty-handed. In Gorbunov's opinion, greed could be ruled out right away. The man was sure his daughter was killed because of him. He was going crazy with guilt and was ready to do anything to find the criminal. Maybe the witnesses were intimidated. Maybe someone doesn't want to get involved with the police without a cash reward. Specialists from various agencies were already involved in the case, but Gorbunov was not going to sit idly by and wait for news. On December 5th, 2009, an announcement appeared on the Cheboksary forum. I'm asking eyewitnesses to come forward. Who saw a black Mazda 6 car near the Smack store? On November 27, 2009, between 5 o'clock p.m. and 5:40 p.m., I also ask everyone who knows or saw anything about the tragic death of Alyona Gorbunova to call the number provided. You can remain anonymous. Viktor Gorbunov. And he got a call. There were people who saw something. The police were actively searching for the criminal. More than 100 witnesses were interviewed. Over 20 examinations were conducted. Important details that could shed light on what happened were the recordings from the supermarket's security cameras. Video recording number 1 was made inside the building. The cameras recorded that at the moment when Alyona Gorbunova entered the supermarket that night, 2 people in dark jackets followed her in. By the way, I'll leave additional materials in Telegram. They walked down the same aisle as the girl, staying behind her, and left the store immediately after her. It was logical to assume that the criminals might have been caught on the footage. Video recording number 2 was made outside. The camera hanging on the supermarket building recorded that after Alyona got into the car, the Mazda stood in place for quite a while with its hazard lights blinking. Unfortunately, it was quite dark outside and it was impossible to see what was happening inside the car. After standing for a few minutes, Alyona's Mazda drove away from the supermarket. The car seemed to be moving hesitantly. Investigators suggested that it was possible the perpetrator or perpetrators were already inside the car with Alyona, which meant that the theory about the 2 young men who followed her out of the store could not be ruled out. Alyona's phone, which disappeared from the crime scene, was also an important clue that could lead to the perpetrator. The perpetrator might have tried to sell the phone and the device could be tracked. It was the phone that became the very thread that eventually led the investigation to the perpetrator. A month later, on suspicion of taking the life of Alyona Gorbunova, 23-year-old Alexei Fyodorov, an unemployed resident of Cheboksary who used illegal substances, was detained. The guy was carrying Gorbunova's phone with him and even used it after changing the SIM card. When the police came to his home, Fyodorov did not resist and obediently allowed himself to be escorted to the station. He confessed to everything in the first interrogation. As it turned out, the motive for the crime was not connected in any way with Viktor Gorbunov's business activities. Fedorov simply needed money very badly. Nothing is known about Alexei Fedorov's living conditions or family situation. According to some reports, at 23 years old, the criminal suffered from a severe drug addiction. He needed a dose every day. There was almost nothing left at home, and as you know, suppliers wouldn't give credit. Somehow Fyodorov managed to get a loan, and not just one. The money he received was spent quickly, then came a second loan. And for a while, he managed to forget about the painful withdrawal. But then the money ran out. The banks started demanding payments, and there was nowhere to get the money from. There was also nowhere to get money for illegal substances. Fyodorov hardly resisted the thoughts of committing a crime when they arose. For him, it was a natural, logical step. If you don't have money, then you need to take it from someone who does. Fyodorov had an asthenic, not athletic build. He wasn't confident in his own strength. He needed to make sure the victim couldn't resist, or that he had a significant advantage over them. Fyodorov noticed the girl in the Mazda near the Smak supermarket. Not just anyone drives a car like that, that was obvious. Gorbunova was dressed expensively and carried herself like royalty. Fyodorov just had to wait for the right moment. He waited for Alyona near the store and followed her to the car. The girl walked without looking around. That's why she didn't pay attention to the guy in the dark jacket walking nearby. Alyona got into the car and started fastening her seatbelt. While she was fiddling with the seatbelt buckle, Fyodorov quietly slipped into the back seat and gently closed the door behind him. According to the criminal, at first he didn't want to take Alyona's life. In his mind, it was supposed to end like this. He would scare the girl, she would hand over the money, he would jump out of the car and run away. But things didn't go as expected. Something went wrong. When Alyona straightened up, a man's hands grabbed her by the shoulders. The tip of a knife pressed against her neck, causing pain. "Give me the money." "If you make a sound, I'll cut your throat," Fyodorov said in the most threatening way. He thought the girl would gasp in fear and start begging him not to hurt her. But unexpectedly, Gorbunova straightened up and boldly met his gaze in the rearview mirror. "You know who I am. I'm Gorbunova's daughter," she said firmly. "Just try to touch me. They'll find you and send you to the next world by tomorrow." Fyodorov didn't care whose daughter she was. He wasn't going to back down. The mockery and lack of fear stunned him at first, and then even made him angry. He put the knife to the girl's throat, and she dared to threaten him. He wasn't joking, and the victim was supposed to understand that. Fyodorov pressed the knife harder against Alyona's neck, and pushed so hard that the blade pierced her skin. The girl squeaked and jerked, but Fyodorov held her tightly. "Now let's get out of here. Quickly," the criminal demanded. They needed to get the car away from the supermarket and prying eyes as soon as possible. This time, Alyona seemed to actually be scared. The car hesitantly pulled away from the parking lot across from the supermarket and rolled down Gagarin Street. Gorbunova drove carefully, pressing her back against the seat and staring straight ahead. The knife was constantly pressed against her neck. Fyodorov was also staring intently at the road ahead. They didn't go far, just to the intersection with Civilskaya Street. By the fence surrounding the grounds of the Olympic Stadium, Fyodorov ordered Alyona to stop. There was no one around. The tinted windows hid what was happening inside from random passers-by. "And now give me the money," Fyodorov said. He was sure that the frightened victim would definitely obey him this time, but Alyona once again started acting off script. She pushed his hand away, grabbed the door handle and tried to break free. And then Fyodorov plunged the knife deep into the girl's neck. He couldn't stop anymore. He struck hard, plunging the knife deep, a total of 7 or 8 times. It was hard to resist in the cramped car interior, especially since the attacker was sitting in the back. Alyona cried out in sharp pain and grabbed her throat, but it was already too late. The very first blow damaged a major vessel, and blood gushed from the girl's neck in a stream, soaking her clothes. The splashes scattered around the cabin. Within a few minutes, Gorbunova lost consciousness from pain and blood loss. Then Fyodorov dragged her to the back seat. According to some reports, he delivered the final blows to a heavily bleeding Alyona when she was already lying on the back seat. The girl was still alive and weakly twitching when the criminal began to check the contents of her purse. The card didn't interest him. Without a PIN code, it was useless, and Alyona wouldn't have been able to tell anyone anything anymore. Taking the cell phone and 500 rubles he found in Gorbunova's wallet, Fyodorov ran away. He later threw the knife away. By that time Alyona was already dead. Perhaps out of disgust, or maybe for some other reason, the criminal didn't touch the lifeless body of the victim to remove the rings. Those 500 rubles would have been enough for a dose. He kept the phone to sell it later, but never got the chance. If you want even more videos, go to Boosty. Exclusive videos that aren't on YouTube are waiting for you at the link. The links are under the video. In general, from all the materials I was able to find in open sources, Alyona appears to be a confident, proud young woman, somewhat spoiled by life, a girl. Having grown up in an atmosphere of adoration and financial security, she took her invulnerability for granted. Her key trait was inner strength and a sense of superiority, inherited from her father, who was a leader. In a crisis situation, this played a fatal role for her. Instead of showing flexibility and submitting to the circumstances, she tried to pressure the attacker by appealing to her status and her father's influence. This reaction, strangely enough, was not so much stupidity as it was a reflection of her entire life experience, in which the surname Gorbunov was a magic shield that solved any problem. But the world doesn't work that way, and Alyona's tragedy is that she encountered a person on whom this shield had no effect. Viktor Gorbunov, Alyona's father, is apparently a strong-willed businessman, but broken by grief. His whole life was built around his daughter, whom he idolized. His personality combines toughness in business and tenderness in the family. After Alyona's death, he was overwhelmed by all-consuming feelings of guilt, which made him look for complicated, orchestrated reasons behind the tragedy. He couldn't accept that his daughter died because of a banal coincidence and a random maniac. His search for someone to blame, turning to psychics, and everything that followed were attempts to escape from innocence. But over time, he went from self-destruction and paranoia to a painful acceptance. He tried to find redemption and turn his personal tragedy into something that brings good, thus preserving the memory of his daughter, and we'll talk more about that a bit later. Alexei Fedorov is a criminal, but he's a socially degraded, weak-willed, impulsive junkie. His personality, after his decline, is of course completely devoid of any moral compass. He is driven by immediate needs, the main one being getting money for drugs. He wasn't a cold-blooded executioner or a professional criminal, no, he's just a fool. His plan was primitive, to intimidate and rob. The key trait is pathological insecurity and wounded pride. The victim's decisive and contemptuous reaction didn't scare him, but rather insulted and unsettled him. It was literally a fatal confrontation. In his mind, deprived of logic and clouded by withdrawal, her resistance became a personal challenge to which he responded with spontaneous, monstrous cruelty. His subsequent erratic actions, which will also be discussed later, demonstrate a lack of backbone and an inability to take responsibility for his actions. He is a product of the bottom of society, for whom human life has become a bargaining chip for a dose. Yes, this happens when you use. Don't shoot up, guys. Your mothers still need you. In general, this story is a classic tragedy of fatal coincidence where two truly opposite people collided, people who, in principle, should never have crossed paths. The world of privilege and confidence in the future that Alyona had, and the world of despair, degradation, and moment-to-moment survival that Fedorov lived in. None of the participants acted according to a complicated, premeditated plan. The taking of a life was the result of impulse, fear, pride, and foolishness, all mixed together in a fatal cocktail, the price of which turned out to be equal to the price of an entire life. After his arrest, Fyodorov willingly cooperated with the investigation, shared details of the crime, and participated in the investigative experiment. It seemed the case was solved, the criminal was found and confessed, and Alyona's father could finally stop tormenting himself with guilt. However, the capture of Fyodorov caused a mixed reaction in society. Many claimed that an unemployed guy who used illegal substances was just too convenient a candidate for the role of the criminal. Fyodorov is clearly taking the blame for Alyona's death at someone's instruction. There are plenty of such cases in criminal history. Torture and psychological pressure during interrogation can make anyone confess to anything. Gorbunov himself was also skeptical about the emergence of a suspect, partly because of Fyodorov's appearance. Here's how he talks about it. Alyona was a strong, sturdy girl. She went to the gym. Fyodorov was thin and weak. He wouldn't have been able to handle her alone. In the supermarket, 2 people were following my daughter. If Fyodorov was the first, then where is the second one? That was the question the man was asking. Gorbunov was sure that the real criminal was still at large. He couldn't just stop blaming himself for what had happened. While the investigators were congratulating themselves on solving the case, the businessman decided to turn to supernatural forces for help. Like many other desperate relatives of victims, he wrote to the show Battle of the Psychics, which was at the peak of its popularity at the time. The episode aired in mid-2010 while the investigation was still ongoing. Just so you know, it's season 9, episode 6 of Battle of the Psychics. So, the psychics unanimously told the unfortunate father that Alyona Gorbunova lost her life because of him. You know perfectly well why this happened to her, insisted one of the psychics. You are to blame for her death. It's your fault. You had a conflict with someone. This person took revenge on you through your daughter, said another. He can harm you as well. Gorbunov left the show completely devastated. That's when he remembered a friend whom he had fired from the position of director, later appointing Alyona in his place. Could the thirst for revenge really have driven his former acquaintance this far? But, as usual, the psychics didn't give any concrete leads, of course. And based on their insights, it was impossible to build an evidentiary case. By the way, write in the comments whether you believe in psychics and in the psychics from the Battle of the Psychics. Let's see how many of us there are. The investigators continued their work. Fedorov got rid of the murder weapon, and it was no longer possible to find the knife, but a man's hair was found on the back seat of the car, and forensic analysis confirmed that it was the hair of the perpetrator. It turned out that Fedorov was not lying. On the night of the crime, he was in Alyona Gorbunova's car and was sitting in the back seat, which means he really was the one who killed Alyona. The evidence was substantial and irrefutable. There were no traces of anyone else being in the car. This meant that Fedorov acted alone after all. After 10 months, the investigation of the case was finally handed over to the court. By the time of the trial, Gorbunov had finally come to terms with the fact that he was not to blame for his daughter's death and that the real criminal was on trial. The psychics played on his emotions and, as usual, were wrong. The prosecution requested a 17-year sentence in a high-security prison for Fedorov as punishment for crimes committed under 2 articles of the Russian Criminal Code, Article 105, Part 2, Murder for Profit, and Article 162, Robbery. When he heard the number, Fedorov, who had previously been quietly admitting his guilt, suddenly seemed to come to his senses. He had just recently turned 24, and by the time he gets out, he'll already be over 40. The prospect of spending all his youth behind bars suddenly became very real. At the very next hearing, Fyodorov stated that he hadn't done anything and that he had been set up. People set me up. He insisted, tell them it was all untrue. But the investigators had more than enough evidence of Fyodorov's guilt. His own initial confession with details of the crime, the results of the crime scene reconstruction, Alyona's phone found in his possession, and the hair discovered in her car, all of this indicated that the real criminal was sitting in the defendant's seat. Alexei Fyodorov exercised his right to request a jury trial according to Article 47 of the Constitution of the Russian Federation. The jury delivered a guilty verdict, but they acknowledged that the young man deserved leniency since it was his first conviction and he did cooperate with the investigation. According to this verdict, Alexei Fyodorov was sentenced to 15 years in a high-security penal colony. The state prosecution was satisfied with the punishment and did not appeal the verdict. After the death of his daughter, Viktor Gorbunov wrote the song Dear Alyonushka, Sweetheart, Gentle Sunshine, which he dedicated to her. He started a new family and is raising 2 children. He says this about what happened. I realized that nothing can be done. What was destined by fate happened, and I have to accept it. The tragedy that happened to his daughter pushed the entrepreneur toward charity. In his native village, he helped open a medical center, which he named Alyonushka. He donated the phone that Alyona had on that fateful night to the medical center.